With each new year, millions of Americans vow to clean up their act, eat healthy, exercise, and cut out drinking. None of which are easy, but the latter proving particularly difficult. Well, here to share how to cut out alcohol safely and effectively is Dr. Kevin Gray, Professor and Director of Addiction Sciences at MUSC. Good to have you with us. And I realize this is late in the game in terms of January, but really, people have had mixed experiences leading up to this point. And it's not to say that it has to stop in January either. So maybe you can share what some of the hurdles are that typically people come across.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for having me for this important topic. And I think first and foremost, as you suggest, it may be a bad time, but it's actually never a bad time to talk about the idea about behavior change toward wellness. Yeah. And so January happens to be a time when many of us are just ready for new beginnings and new changes. But we also know that sometimes what we intend, the reality becomes a little bit different, and it can be challenging to try to do all at once behavior change. Sure. So as we get a few weeks into January, people have mixed experiences with trying to reduce or trying to eliminate drinking in general. And I think part of it is it's always good for us to aim high, but also have some grace for ourselves when things are more challenging than we expect. And with this idea is that what we want to do is not all change at once, but we want to sort of gravitate toward sustainable change.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I think for people to just go cold turkey is really hard, and maybe it's unrealistic. And I think when we're thinking about fresh starts, New Year's, you go whole hog, but then you have a quick burnout too. But this is a lifestyle change. This is taking a moment to recognize, you know what, maybe I do drink too much. And what is too much, if there is kind of a set standard?
Sure. So there are some set standards easily available online in terms of adult male versus adult female in terms of number of standard drinks per day. Generally speaking, though, some people can already kind of infer, maybe I'm drinking more than my peers, or maybe it's gone to too many days per week. And you sort of have your own limits, but I think it's also good to compare across population norms. And so one of the things that's a big marker in terms of that is daily drinking, and trying to get stock of that and recognizing that it can be insidious, where you go from, well, I may have a glass of wine after dinner or with dinner, and then that turns into, well, the bottle of wine is open, I should have another drink. And sometimes that can escalate over time, and I think that's one of the things people want to take stock of and think about setting some limits on that.
Yeah, what are some of the physical brain signals that show you've been drinking too much?
Certainly. So our body has a number of ways of telling us that we've had too much. And so I think the classic things you think about is on one occasion drinking to excess is there's the hangover the next day that some people experience with headache and nausea, really unpleasant feelings. Oftentimes what happens though is there's also a related phenomenon called tolerance, in which it takes more alcohol to get the same effect as when you first started drinking. And so sometimes people gradually increase their use because they want to get that same feeling. And so tolerance and withdrawal kind of are hand in hand. So withdrawal is another phenomenon. If somebody's gone for weeks or months of daily drinking, where if they suddenly stop drinking, they have things like sweats, shakes, cravings. And that's something where I would always caution, if somebody wants to go cold turkey, is be thoughtful. If you've been drinking daily for some period of time, it's really important to make that behavior change, but also to consult a physician as you're doing that.
If you're that far into the addiction, is it safe to go cold turkey, or is it advisable to ease into it, and by means of introducing non-alcoholic beverages, or just cutting down? So
I would say twofold. One is each situation is unique. I would say I would prefer the cutting back part in it, but it's the medical situation is the one I'm most attuned to. If somebody has been drinking daily for weeks, months, or years, is where I would recommend they consult their physician or a specialist to get advice on how best to do it and have that medically managed, because alcohol withdrawal can be very dangerous and can be potentially fatal.
Right, exactly. And can you tell physically before you even go to a doctor that you're starting to have cirrhosis of the liver or other issues?
So sometimes people can have, so the issue would be if you wake up the next day with cravings, and perhaps if it's been several hours since you've had your last drink and starting to have shakes, those sorts of things are ones that prompt that this is something that might need medical intervention rather than going it alone. Again, there's a whole spectrum in terms of drinking, so I don't want to caution people away from. It is important to get under control in terms of drinking across the full spectrum, but there are some cases where it's medically more complicated.
And with just a few seconds left, maybe you can walk us through some of the ways in which we can avoid drinking when we're wanting it. You know, if there's that craving for that glass of wine by the fire at the end of the day, how do we steer away from it and do something else?
So absolutely. So I think you actually hinted at it. Part of it is distraction and substitution. So find something else you can be doing that takes time, but also can be reinforcing on its own without having to have alcohol. So it's something that I feel that I accomplished something rather than having had a drink. It's also very helpful to team up with somebody else and kind of have shared goals and a little friendly competition.
Accountability too.
Accountability. Yeah. Here's another one for those in late January who are frustrated by their experiences. Another version of this is something that's more sustained is let's have a dry week every month of the year.
Right.
The idea that that's a more sustained behavior and might be more realistic for folks at stepping into making this a longer term solution.
Okay, and just give yourself that grace like you said earlier.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate it. We're back after this.